All right, so when we're defining the midpoint function, same idea. We need to first tell the calculator what we're doing. Okay, so we're going to use the command for define. That's located in the F4 tab. We next give it a name. The name that we're going to give it, again, needs to be descriptive enough to identify what you're finding, but it's not going to interfere or overlap with something that's already been assigned in the calculator. So midpt will work. So I'm going to alpha lock and type that in. Next, my order of inputs, I'm going to keep it the same. I'm just going to order it as a list of coordinates, h1, k1, followed by h2, k2. So on my calculator, same thing. And then finally, I'm going to write in my calculation. Okay, for midpoint, we're going to use something called a matrix. Did you guys study those at all in algebra last year? Okay, what a matrix allows you to do is it allows you to do individual calculations in separate cells or columns. And so that's going to be useful here because when you look at the midpoint formula for a set of coordinates, the midpoint is equal to the average of the x coordinates, so h1 plus h2 over 2. And then a separate calculation, it's not connected in any way to the first, is the average of the y's, which are k1 plus k2 over 2. Okay, so what we have here with the midpoint is two completely separate and isolated calculations. The only way that we can deal with that without them, again, overlapping or being part of the same calculation is to separate them into unique cells of a matrix. Okay, so here's how we will enter our matrix. And the matrix is used by or identified with a square bracket. Okay, the square brackets are located right above the 9. It's the blue, the second function, and then the comma, and the second function in the division key. Those are your two square brackets. And when you're using your calculator for a matrices are split into rows and columns. And each column is separated by a comma in a matrix, and each row is separated by a semicolon. And so the comma is the button right above the 9. The semicolon is the second function 9. And so it's that little blue semicolon right above the 9. Okay, for this one, we're going to stick with one single row with two columns. So all we need to do in our calculation is separate each of the columns by a comma. So let's take our first calculation. Our first calculation is the average of the x's. So we're going to take h1 plus h2 and divide that in half. That is our first calculation. That's the x coordinate of our midpoint. So if we hit equals, use the square bracket to enter the matrix mode, and then we calculate the sum of our h's divided by 2. There's our average h value. A comma is going to separate this into a new column, so this next calculation will be completely unique. And so our next calculation is the average of the y's, which is k1 plus k2 divided by 2. Okay, so we enter that on our calculator. And then the final thing is to close off our matrix. This is the last thing that we want. And when we hit enter, again, it should say done. So now it's defined in your calculator, and you can access it at that var link catalog at any time. Now, if you wanted to, I've had students in the past who combine these into one single calculation, because often distance and midpoint you're finding with the same set of coordinates. And so if you wanted to, and you understood that, you could separate this by another comma, and you could have written this entire function right here after that comma, and then your outputs would be the set of coordinates for your midpoint, and then the furthest piece of information would be the distance. And so it's up to you whether you want to keep these as two separate things. You can combine them into one. Like I said, I'd like you to, if you can get to the point where you enter any functions that you want to enter, that would be an ideal process. Okay, but regardless, let's test this on sample problem number 8. Okay, so on the sample problem number 8, we found the midpoint of this same set of coordinates. So the midpoint of A, B. And what we found that midpoint to be was -1, 1. Okay, so when we enter these coordinates, 2, -1, -4, 3, into this calculation for midpoint, we should get this set of coordinates. So let's test it and see if we do. So to access that, go to the var link catalog. I'm looking for midpoint, so I'm going to hit the button that's associated with M, which is number 5. That'll take me to the first function that starts with the letter M, which happens to be midpoint. Now I'm going to enter my inputs, 2, -1, followed by -4, 3. Again, it's just a list of my coordinates for those ordered pair. And when I hit enter, I see that it confirms. -1, 1. You see it gives you the answer as a matrix. And so it actually resembles what the set of coordinates should kind of look like anyway.